A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms hits TV screens this week, but is it worth having a read of, or are you better off going in blind? If you're excited for the show, or you've just been considering picking this one up, today I'm going to break down my thoughts, giving you some of the good stuff, some of the bad stuff, some of the stuff in between, and ultimately helping you decide whether A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is worth a read. First, we're going to talk about the plot, then we're going to talk about characters before moving into the fun factor, and then talking about the emotional resonance, the world building, and last of all, readability. So let's start with plot. This one isn't actually a full novel, it is 3 short stories that follow the adventures of a hedge knight called Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg. The first story is extremely strong in the way that it's actually written, and I really felt like that one was probably the best out of the 3 because it followed a structure that made somewhat sense to me, and where we got to at the end, I really loved that, and I can definitely see that being pulled off really well as the pilot episode of the television series, so I'm actually very much looking forward to that. As a story itself, though, it really performed, and it had a really good plot twist in it, probably the best plot twist out of all 3 of them, that really excited me, especially as a Game of Thrones fan. If you're not a Game of Thrones fan, maybe this isn't the book for you, but if you are just adamant that you want to read a bit of Westeros and you need something a little bit quirky and different to get you in, this won't be such a bad place to start, but you probably won't get all of the references, although you will get to grips with the hierarchy over time, or maybe you just need to do a bit of research on the hierarchy to kind of fully get what is going on. But either way, I think the first story stands out really well. The second story for me did drag. It didn't really have as much of a narrative structure that I enjoyed as much. It did feel a lot more like it was meandering, and like kind of in the way that short stories are sort of allowed to do. We are very much just experiencing things. I didn't fully get to grips with what the conflict was of that particular story, but I did enjoy spending time in the world, but again, we'll talk about that in world, but as a plot, I didn't think the second one really held up very well, and then the third one came in with a good plot, and it explored a storyline that I actually think would have been much better had we had more with these characters. We actually don't get that much of a time with these characters. We get a few, it's about 360 pages altogether, combining all 3 stories, which means we don't get loads and loads of time with these characters, which does mean that one of the plot points in the third story, it just didn't land as well as I think it will do if we spend more time with them. So I'm actually really excited to see how the television series is going to remedy that. I do think that this book does stand very well as a really good proof of concept for what is going to be a very hopefully an entertaining series, but as a book, as a series of 3 short stories, it's quite frustrating in some ways because I never felt like I got quite enough, which I can't be a bad thing, I suppose, because if you want more of something, then is it really that bad? I do think, however, that we did need a little bit more time with them for the third short story to fully pay off, although I did appreciate the route that we went down because it is kind of a question that you're asking from the end of the first short story. But ultimately, as far as plot stands out, 2 out of 3 of these ones were really enjoyable to read. However, one of them kind of meandered a little bit too much for me, and I wanted it to kind of get to the point a little bit more. Moving on to characters. Now, the 2 main characters at question here are Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg. And Duncan, I think, is probably the standout part of the entire series. He's a really relatable character from very early on in. The fact that he's actually quite a young person, he's 17 years old, I believe, and he's quite naive to the world, even though he's had kind of an interesting upbringing. If you're a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, then he was brought up in Flea Bottom, and you know what that means. It does mean that he was brought up on the streets, pretty much. And so to see that he's progressed into this person that just wants to do the best, and he wants to see the best in other people, and that is really fun to see, because that type of a character interacting in a world such as Westeros makes for such an interesting conflict, especially if you are a Song of Ice and Fire fan and you've already read the books. This book kind of assumes that you have already either seen the TV series or read the books, so that you have a bit of an idea of the world, because otherwise if you went in blind, I guess you'd start off being kind of naive with Duncan as well. Whereas I think half the fun with this particular story is watching Duncan struggle his way through, trying to figure things out, and just trying to be a good person in general. The fact that he just wants to be honourable is so interesting and noteworthy. And then you've got other sides to him, of course, when he is actually treating Egg, his squire. He kind of treats him as his old master used to treat him, and he's got his own thoughts and insecurities about whether he's good enough to be this knight that Egg looks up to. And those insecurities are obviously even more ramped up by certain circumstances that you will learn, and I won't go into because I want to keep this as spoiler free as possible. But Sir Duncan is, yeah, he's my favourite part of the whole thing, and the reason why I would pick up another short story is because I actually really like this character, and George R. R. Martin has a way of bringing characters to life in such a way that makes them feel quite real and lived in people, while Sir Duncan the Tall is a very lovely person as far as anyone that lives in Westeros is concerned most of the time. He does have his moments of darkness, well, I wouldn't say darkness, but he has his moments where he gets things wrong, or he says the wrong thing, or does the wrong thing, or he can be quite harsh sometimes to Egg, and I think that kind of humanises him quite a lot. So he's a really great character to read. Egg, on the other hand, who is quite young, he's quite a young boy, who does become his squire. I find Egg so interesting because he's so worldly, and he is almost like, whereas Dunk is naive and he's meant to be the leader, Egg is not naive. He's very streetworthy, although he doesn't know when certain things are appropriate for certain reasons I will not get into. He doesn't know when it's appropriate to do certain things or say certain things, so it's kind of interesting to see how he blunders his way into these situations. But ultimately, he definitely feels like the smarter character out of the series. He is kind of the brain, whereas Dunk is kind of the brawns, and that makes for a very interesting story, especially because I swear he's like under 10 years old, so he's like a really young kid, but he's really, really worldly as well. But then there's so many things that he doesn't know, and I think this works so well because the two characters complement each other, and I actually think that they are the reason why this set of stories is loved by fans, because honestly they are so compelling together when put in the world of Westeros. It's a very fun thing to read. I think the biggest problem that I had with these characters is that I just wanted to give them time to breathe and know more about them and see more from them, and again it's kind of the same problem with the plot of book 3, is that I just didn't get enough of their relationship. I feel like we had the bare bones, the structure of their relationship was kind of there, but I felt like we needed to build on it a lot more, and yeah, I'd love to read a novel with these guys in. I genuinely think it would be really interesting, but ultimately I can't fault the characters, those two characters in particular. The characters around them were also very interesting. Again, they're going to be more interesting to you if you know the house system of Game of Thrones. If you don't know the house system, then it's probably going to be a little harder to depict things, although you probably will learn things as you go along, so it's totally up to you as to whether you want to go into this before that series, but I'm suggesting that you don't. The next thing I like to talk about is fun factor, and the reason why I like to talk about this is because I don't see loads of people talking about this, and I'm one of those people that, like, if I come out of something and I had fun, but it didn't make me think, I still enjoyed it, and I'm like, I had fun. This was fun. And sometimes books are just a good time, like, you know, or like movies, for example. I call these like the blockbuster movies, you know. Sometimes they're just a good time. The most fun that I had while reading this book was seeing the character interactions, seeing how Dunk made decisions, seeing the situations that he was put into, seeing him kind of overcome those situations, and towards the end of the first one, just seeing him, you know, do things that I think he's the underdog, and I think ultimately it's always very fun to root for the underdog, so when things work out for said underdog, it is great. Not saying that they always do, there are actually plenty of times where they don't. This is Westeros, and this is George R. R. Martin rewriting this. This is not just some kind of like fairy tale. There are things that do go wrong for Dunk, but ultimately, when things go right, they are extremely fun, and so I would say the fun factor of this book, I wouldn't say it's like ridiculously high, because for me a fun factor book is kind of like action-packed and, you know, you're constantly enjoying the thrill of it. This book has its moments where it's not action-packed, although there is plenty of action in there. There's a good balance of action and chill-out time, but overall it is a lot of fun to spend time with these characters. The thing that does kill the fun just a little bit is the fact that this is episodic in nature, which means that you can never have the most amount of fun that you could have had if it was a full novel. So it does kind of limit that, and every single story resets how much fun you're going to have. So in the second one, like I say, I've already told you this, it drags, and the fun that I had in that one wasn't as much, although there were still fun moments within that one, and again, it just comes from seeing Dunk interact in certain ways. So actually I did have a lot of fun in the second book, it just wasn't a good plot. But this is fun in bursts, and if you don't mind the story kind of resetting at the end of each short story, and you know that you're getting in for a short story collection, I think you probably still have fun too. In terms of emotional resonance, I would say that it's very easy to really connect and care for Dunk very quickly, especially because we start off when he's literally buried his master, the man that kind of brought him up and looked after him, and now he's on his own in the world, and you can't help but root for him because he doesn't just sit there and do nothing. He goes out there and tries to make something of himself and become the knight that this guy expected him to be, and he's constantly guided in his head by that man. And I'm very touched by that, and by the fact that he is constantly trying to be the same as that knight, and the fact that he really cares about honor makes you really care about it too, and how brave he can actually be when faced against people who are just buried in the class system, and they're buried in a system where, you know, it doesn't really matter if they're honorable. A lot of the time honor is a strategy in Game of Thrones, but within Dunk's story, he isn't actually doing this strategically. He's doing what he believes is right, and some of the decisions that he makes, you know, you do wholeheartedly care about them. So actually, I think there is a huge amount of emotional resonance with Dunk, and I think giving him that level of grief and that person that he's lost, seeing him stand up and try and use that for in a positive way, in my opinion, makes me feel very connected to him. I think grief is something that we all go through, and it can be really debilitating and really tricky to continue. And I think a lot of the time, reading characters that do stuff that you don't necessarily believe of yourself can often inspire you to do something too. And that is kind of where I emotionally resonate most with this. I really love that while Duncan doesn't know everything, he will put his best foot forward, and he does that from a place of actually caring. Not only does he care about being kind of the best knight he can be, he also cares about helping Egg become the best that he can be, and that really emotionally resonates with me. So I would say, yes, there is a huge level of emotional resonance. I'm not going to say that I sat there bawling my eyes out or anything. I was never like getting tingles or chills from everything, but there was definitely a huge part of me invested within that character. In the same way that I've said about the bad things of the other things, is that the main thing that really holds this back is that it is a collection of 3 short stories. And I think I don't want to be unfair on that, because this was just the choice. This was the medium. It was just smashing 3 short stories together. These were all written separately, not for this particular book. They were written separately. But at the same time, I can't deny the fact that it does dilute that sense of emotional resonance that I probably would have got had it been in an overarching story for Dunk and Egg. But either way, I still think there's enough emotional resonance to warrant reading. I don't really think I need to go into world building all that much with this one, but I will say that it is extremely good. George R. R. Martin is so good at making a world feel alive, but like not overfeeding you information. He's so good at not giving you too much information, but just giving you the right amount of information at the right time, and that is always extremely fun to read, and it's still here. The world expects you to understand it, which is why if you've already read A Song of Ice and Fire, you're probably going to enjoy this a lot more, though it doesn't mean that you can't read it and still learn things about the world as you go. This isn't going to teach you everything, but you are going to start to learn enough to be able to enjoy the series. As far as worlds go, I just think George R. R. Martin is brilliant. I don't think we need to go into this. Westeros is a very fully rounded place with interesting systems. The magic system in Westeros, there's never really a magic system per se. Like, I never understood the magic of Westeros. It is very mysterious. Magic doesn't really play a part in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. It's very much like an alternative medieval fantasy in some ways, I guess. Like, it's a medieval era. It's not actually what we went through, and there are a few things thrown in there. There were once dragons that roamed the world. We get to see some dragon eggs along the way. There are no actual dragons within this story, because this is at a time when dragons are no longer in existence. However, the world itself, if you know anything about Westeros, you will know that it is a very interesting world to be in, and I don't think I need to say much more than that, but it doesn't really impact the overall story as much. I don't think there's as much world building. It's mainly down to kind of the house system that is kind of brushed upon here. Finally, the readability and the prose. I find George R. R. Martin's prose to be so engaging and so easy to read. George R. R. Martin knows when to say what in certain ways. I can't really explain it. I wish I could, because I'm a writer too, and I do want to learn how to write as well as he does. But he literally just immerses you, and he knows when to say things, and he writes prose in such a way that it's just digestible. You don't actually feel overwhelmed by anything that he's saying. There's never any massive info dumps that confuse you or make you want to turn away from the page. If you're just there for a quick short story, a bit of fun, then you're going to have a lot of fun with this one, because it's extremely easy to read, and there's plenty of elements in there for you to enjoy. So ultimately, I would say that reading A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is totally worth it if you are interested in a quirky, alternative take on Westeros. But if you're trying to go there for the grimdark, then, you know, it's not for you. If you're new to the series, then going in being aware that you probably won't know everything from the off is going to get you the strongest start. But ultimately, you let me know in the comments. Do you think A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is worth reading, or do you think we should go into the television series blind? Are you excited for the television series? Is there any other books you should read if you did enjoy this one? Just let me know. I'll speak to you guys in the next one. See you soon. Bye.